It was 1983, the final act of the Cold War, and the Soviet Union, wounded and bleeding from Afghanistan, strangled by economic collapse, was perhaps at its most dangerous. For 2 years, Marcus Reed had walked through that danger as if it were his natural habitat. To the clerks and bureaucrats of the Ministry of Foreign Trade, he was Mikhail Volkov, a mid-level procurement specialist with an unremarkable face, a taste for bad vodka, and an uncanny ability to smooth over difficult negotiations. He knew which officials preferred American jazz records to cash bribes, which ones had mistresses in Leningrad, and which ones would look the other way when shipment manifests didn't quite add up. Marcus spoke Russian like a man who'd learned it in Leningrad's back alleys rather than Langley's sterile classrooms. He was perfect. He was invisible. Until the morning when the phone call ended too quickly. Marcus sat in his cramped apartment on Tverskaya Street, the receiver pressed against his ear, listening to Irina whisper her report. She was his lowest-level asset, a nervous administrative assistant with access to personnel files and an elderly mother who needed Western medicine. She'd never wanted to be a spy. None of them ever did. "There's a security audit," Irina breathed, her voice thin with fear. "Started yesterday. They're reviewing all personnel files, all communications logs from the past." The line clicked. Not the mechanical click of a disconnection. Something else. Something synthetic and precise, like a door closing in a soundproof room. Then a voice, cold and clear, speaking Russian with the flat intonation of absolute authority. "Stop speaking." The line went dead. Marcus didn't hesitate. In 2 years of undercover work, he'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind. The nightmare scenario. The instant when the carefully constructed house of cards finally collapsed. The clock that had been ticking silently for 730 days suddenly stopped. His mind shifted into pure operational mode. Emotion draining away, like water through a sieve. He glanced at his watch. 9:47 a.m. He allowed himself 47 minutes. Not because it was the ideal amount of time, but because it was the maximum window he had before the black Volga sedans, the KGB's signature vehicles, would be circling his building. Marcus stood and moved to the kitchen with deliberate speed. The emergency door key, taped under the sink handle for precisely this eventuality, came away easily. Into his pocket. He crossed to the small desk where Mikhail Volkov's life existed in paper form. Requisition orders, trade correspondence, party membership documents, all meticulously forged. His hand found the lighter. The papers went into the metal trash bin. He burned them methodically, watching the flames consume 2 years of carefully constructed lies. The apartment filled with smoke. But Moscow apartments always smelled of something burning. No one would notice. His hands moved with programmed efficiency. False passports into the flames, microfilm negatives of shipping routes and military cargo manifests, contact protocols, recognition codes. Everything that connected Mikhail Volkov to Marcus Reed. Everything except the one thing he couldn't destroy, the intelligence he'd gathered, microfilmed and hidden in the hollowed-out sole of his left boot. 2 years of work, compressed into a thin strip of acetate. He glanced at his watch. 9:59 a.m. 12 minutes gone. In the bedroom, Marcus stripped away Mikhail Volkov like a snake shedding skin. The ill-fitting Soviet suit went into a canvas bag. Out came the second identity he'd prepared for exactly this contingency. Dmitri, a low-level black market courier. Rougher clothes, a worker's cap, a canvas coat that had actually seen manual labor. He rubbed dirt into his hands, mussed his hair, changed his entire posture. Mikhail had walked with the slight stoop of a bureaucrat who spent too long hunched over paperwork. Dmitri would move differently, quicker, warier, with the defensive posture of a man who lived on the margins. He checked the street from the window, staying back from the glass. Normal morning traffic. Babushkas with their shopping bags. A delivery truck. No black Volgas. Not yet. 10:18 a.m. 31 minutes gone. Marcus took one last look around the apartment. No personal effects. He'd never allowed himself the luxury. No photographs, no letters. Nothing that revealed the man beneath the mask. Just the ashes of Mikhail Volkov's paper life cooling in the trash bin. He opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and locked it behind him. The building's ancient elevator groaned somewhere above. Marcus took the stairs, moving at the unhurried pace of a man with nowhere important to be. He emerged onto Tverskaya Street at 10:34 a.m. 47 minutes exactly. 1 block south, a black Volga sedan pulled silently to the curb. Marcus turned north, the canvas bag over his shoulder, and disappeared into the Moscow morning. Mikhail Volkov ceased to exist. Dmitri took his first breath. The clock had stopped. The running had begun. That same evening, in a windowless room 3 floors beneath Lubyanka Square, Colonel Viktor Krylov watched a ghost disappear. The surveillance footage was grainy, shot from a camera concealed in a building across from Marcus's apartment. The timestamp read 10:34 a.m. A figure emerged from the entrance, canvas bag over shoulder, worker's cap pulled low, the hunched posture of a man accustomed to being overlooked. He turned north and vanished into the crowd within seconds. Viktor rewound the tape, watched it again. His hands, resting on the edge of the light table used for analyzing surveillance film, were cold. They were always cold, even in the oppressive heat of the basement operations center. Some men ran hot with anger or ambition. Viktor Krylov ran cold with calculation. "That's him?" asked Major Petrov, standing at Viktor's shoulder. The major was young, eager, still believed that enthusiasm could substitute for intelligence. "Yes." Viktor's voice was flat. He zoomed in on the figure's gait, the way he moved through space. "Watch how he walks. Different posture than the man who entered that building 2 years ago as Mikhail Volkov. Different rhythm, but the efficiency is the same. See? No wasted movement. No backward glances. He knows exactly where the camera blind spots are. We had men there within 8 minutes of the call intercept, and he needed 47. Viktor straightened, his pale eyes still fixed on the frozen frame. Too fast. He's running on a pre-programmed instinct. 2 years of intelligence work, 2 years of building a network, cultivating assets, and he walks away with nothing but the clothes on his back. He paused, and something like admiration crept into his voice. That's professionalism, and it's insulting. Petrov shifted uncomfortably. We have his description. We'll find him. Will you? Viktor turned from the light table, his gaze settling on the younger man with the weight of someone who'd spent 20 years hunting people who didn't want to be found. He's already 3 identities deep by now. The man you're looking for doesn't exist anymore. He never really did. But Viktor knew something the eager major didn't. Every spy, no matter how good, had a pattern, a psychology. Marcus Reed, and Viktor had studied his file until he could recite it in his sleep, was a finisher. 2 years of work meant 2 years of collected intelligence. Intelligence that needed extraction. Men like Reed didn't run without trying to save the mission. Double surveillance at all known extraction points, Victor ordered. Border towns, ports, diplomatic compounds. And I want eyes on every Western contact we've ever identified. He'll try to pass his intelligence along. When he does, we'll have him. And if he just runs, tries to disappear. Victor smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Then we're not hunting the man. I think we're hunting. 2 months later, the winter had settled over Russia like a sentence. Marcus Reed stood in the chaos of Sanaya Market in Leningrad, the Soviet Union's window to the west, now frozen shut by December cold, and felt the weight of exhaustion in his bones. He hadn't slept more than 3 hours straight in weeks. Couldn't risk it. Dreams made you vulnerable, and vulnerability in his position meant death. He'd traded Moscow's oppressive familiarity for Leningrad's anonymous sprawl. But the city offered no comfort. Every face in the crowd was a potential security agent. Every shadow held the possibility of a trap. The KGB had long arms and longer memories, and Viktor Krylov, Marcus had learned the name of his hunter through the intelligence grapevine, was reportedly the best counterintelligence officer in the service. The market pressed around him, vendors hawking frozen fish and black market cigarettes, babushkas negotiating over cabbage, the smell of cheap tobacco and desperation. Marcus wore 3 layers against the cold, and still felt it gnawing at him. He'd lost weight. His face had gone hollow. The microfilm in his boot sole felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He was buying bread, or pretending to, when he saw them. 2 men, heavy sheepskin coats, moving through the crowd with the too straight posture of ex-military, their eyes sweeping the marketplace with professional precision. Marcus hadn't seen their faces clearly, but he recognized the geometry of their movement. A pincer. One angling left, one angling right, closing the distance with the patience of men who knew their prey couldn't run forever. His body reacted before his mind finished processing. The bread dropped from his hand. The satchel of false papers, his 3rd set of documents, the 3rd identity in 2 months, slipped from his shoulder. He didn't look back to see it fall. Marcus melted into the crowd, using shoppers as cover, flowing with the current of bodies toward the market's western exit. Behind him, he heard a sharp whistle, the signal between pursuit teams. They'd spotted him. His mind raced through options. He was 300 kilometers from the Estonian border. Pavel, an elderly railway contact, was his last hope. A final extraction point at a frozen depot just south of the border town. One last chance to pass the intelligence to someone who could get it west. But that meant trusting the network one more time. Trusting that Pavel hadn't been compromised. Trusting that Viktor Krylov hadn't anticipated his every move. Marcus emerged from the market into a narrow side street, the winter wind cutting through his layers like a knife. He kept walking, forcing himself to maintain an unhurried pace. One foot in front of the other, north toward the railway yards. The clock was ticking again. And this time, he wasn't sure how much time he had left. The journey north took Marcus 3 days. He traveled the way ghosts traveled. Freight trains and livestock trucks, walking when he had to, sleeping in abandoned barns and railway sidings where the snow drifted high enough to hide a man. The cold was relentless, a living thing that burrowed into his chest and made every breath an act of will. His face had gone numb days ago. He'd lost feeling in 3 toes on his right foot. But the boot on his left foot, the one with the hollowed sole containing 2 years of microfilmed intelligence, still fit perfectly. Some burdens you carried no matter what. The landscape changed as he moved toward the Estonian border. Moscow's urban sprawl gave way to Leningrad's industrial grimness, which finally surrendered to the vast, empty whiteness of the northwestern frontier. Out here, the Soviet Union felt like what it truly was: an empire stretched too thin, held together by surveillance and fear and the sheer weight of winter. Pavel's depot was a small railway station outside a border town, close enough to Estonia that you could smell freedom on clear days. Or so the old man had once joked. Marcus had met him only twice before, both times in careful circumstances. Pavel was a relic of the old partisan networks, a railway worker who'd spent 4 decades moving things that weren't supposed to move. People, information, hope. If Pavel was still alive, if he was still trustworthy, if Viktor Krylov hadn't already wrapped his cold fingers around this final thread. Marcus pushed the thoughts away. Doubt was a luxury he couldn't afford. He reached the depot at 0300 hours, the darkest point of the night. The temperature had dropped to -20, maybe lower. His breath crystallized in the air, each exhale marking his position like a signal flare. The depot was a collection of shadows. Timber stacks, a small equipment shed, the skeletal silhouette of a loading crane frozen against the stars. And there, exactly where it should be, on the 4th stack of timber, a low yellow glow. Pavel's lantern, the signal that meant it was safe to approach. Marcus felt something unclench in his chest. 2 months of running, 2 months of paranoia and near misses, and finally, he stopped. The snow around the timber stack was disturbed. Not unusual in itself. Workers moved through here during the day. But these prints were fresh, the edges still sharp in the brittle cold. And they were too large. Pavel was an old man, slight and bent. These boot prints belonged to someone younger, heavier. Marcus crouched in the shadows, his mind working through the implications with the cold logic of a man who'd survived this long by trusting his instincts. Pavel might have brought help, might have needed assistance moving the package. Might have. No. Pavel was 70 years old and had survived Stalin's purges, Khrushchev's thaw, Brezhnev's stagnation. He'd survived by being careful. He'd never bring anyone to a dead drop, never compromise operational security, which meant the boot prints belonged to someone else. Viktor Krylov had been here, was perhaps still here, waiting in the darkness with the patience of a man who'd anticipated every move his prey would make. The trap was perfect. The lantern glowing on schedule, the signal exactly right. Everything designed to draw Marcus into the open, where there would be no escape, no second chances. Viktor had read him completely, had understood that Marcus wouldn't abandon 2 years of intelligence, wouldn't run without trying to complete the mission, professional recognizing professional across a chessboard of ice and shadow. Marcus had 3 choices, and he evaluated them with the clinical detachment of a man standing at the edge of his own grave. 1. Retreat. Fade back into the winter, abandon the mission, try to find another extraction route. Live to fight another day. 2. Wait. See if Pavel appeared, if the situation clarified itself. Risk freezing to death while Viktor's net closed tighter. 3. Run through. The Estonian border was only 2 kilometers north, across the frozen Narva River. If he moved fast enough, committed completely enough, he might make it before they could organize a proper pursuit. The smart choice was retreat, the professional choice. But Marcus was so tired of running. And the weight of the microfilm in his boot, 2 years of risked lives, of Irina's frightened whisper before the line went dead, of every careful conversation and dangerous meeting. Felt heavier than the ice and cold and exhaustion combined. He thought of Viktor Krylov, somewhere in the darkness, with his cold hands and colder eyes, confident that Marcus would make the rational choice, the professional choice. Marcus stood and began walking toward the border, not away from the trap, through it. Behind him, a dog barked, high-pitched and eager, the sound of a trained pursuit animal picking up a scent. Then a voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, cut through the winter night with the clarity of a knife. "The river is too thin, Volkov." "Stop," Viktor's voice, close, unnervingly close. Marcus ran. The depot fell away behind him, swallowed by darkness and distance. Ahead, through the skeletal trees, he could see the pale expanse of the Narva River stretching like a frozen highway between captivity and freedom. 2 kilometers of ice between him and Estonia, between him and survival. His lungs burned, his legs pumped mechanically, muscle memory overriding exhaustion. Behind him, he heard the heavy crunch of boots in snow, multiple pursuers, closing fast. The river's edge rose before him, and Marcus didn't slow. He hit the ice at full speed, felt it hold beneath his weight, and kept running toward the far bank where the lights of freedom waited in the darkness. The ice spoke beneath Marcus's feet, not the solid silence of winter-locked water, but a language of stress and fracture, subtle cracks that spider-webbed outward with each pounding step, soft groans that rose from the depths like warnings from a dying world. The Narva River had frozen early this year, but not deep enough, not solid enough for what Marcus was asking of it. He ran anyway. Behind him, the pursuit sounds multiplied. Boots hammering snow. The dogs barking grew frantic, closer. Flashlight beams swept across the ice, turning the frozen river into a landscape of racing shadows. Viktor's voice came again over the loudspeaker, but the words were lost to the wind and Marcus's own ragged breathing. The far bank seemed impossibly distant. Marcus had crossed 1,000 meters, maybe more, but the Estonian shore still looked like a photograph, flat and unreachable. His legs burned. Each breath was a knife in his lungs. The cold had moved beyond discomfort into something almost hallucinogenic, a numbing dissociation that made his body feel like a machine piloted from a great distance. Halfway across, the ice shrieked. The sound cut through everything else, a high, tortured keening like metal tearing. Marcus felt the surface shift beneath him, felt the microscopic drop as the ice settled another millimeter toward its breaking point. He didn't stop. Stopping meant death. A gunshot cracked across the frozen expanse. The bullet didn't hit him. Warning shot, probably, meant to freeze him in place, make him surrender. Viktor wanted him alive for interrogation, wanted to know what he'd learned, who else was compromised. But Marcus had seen what happened to captured agents. Lubyanka's basement had cells that swallowed men whole. Another crack, this one from the ice directly ahead. A dark line appeared, zigzagging across the white surface like lightning frozen in time. Water, black and hungry, welled up through the fracture. Marcus adjusted his trajectory, angling toward thicker ice, but his pursuers were gaining. He could hear their breathing now, the mechanical efficiency of men in peak physical condition chasing down an exhausted target. They'd reach him before he reached the far bank. The math was simple and unforgiving. He needed to lighten his load. The thought came with terrible clarity. Marcus had carried the weight of 2 years across Moscow and Leningrad, through freezing trains and abandoned barns, through every moment of the past 2 months. The microfilm in his left boot, shipment manifests, military supply routes, evidence of treaty violations, the architecture of Soviet military logistics in Eastern Europe, was worth more than his life. Worth more than any single life, but not if he died here, on the ice, with Viktor Krylov standing over his frozen corpse. Marcus didn't slow. His hands moved to his left boot, fumbling with frozen fingers at the laces. The ice groaned beneath him, a bass note of impending collapse. Behind him, the lead pursuer was close enough that Marcus could hear the man's equipment rattling. Radio, handcuffs, the instruments of capture. The boot came free. For a moment, Marcus held it. Held 2 years of work, 2 years of risk. Held Irina's whispered warnings and Pavel's quiet courage, and every careful lie he told in the name of something larger than himself. The weight of it was immense. The cost of letting it go was incalculable. He planted his right foot, wound up like a pitcher on the mound, and kicked the boot with everything he had left. It flew. A black projectile against white snow, tumbling end over end, sliding across the ice toward the Estonian shore. Marcus watched it go, watched 2 years of his life reduced to a piece of leather, skittering across a frozen river, and felt something break inside him that had nothing to do with the ice. Lighter now, 1 boot lighter, he ran. The ice held, barely. Each step was a gamble, each moment a negotiation with physics and fate. The pursuit sounds fell back slightly. His pursuers had slowed, probably recognizing the danger of the thinning ice, weighing the risk of capture against the risk of drowning in black water. But Victor's voice came again, cutting through the wind. "You can't run forever, Reed." His real name. Not Volkov, not Dmitri. Marcus Reed. Victor had known all along who he really was. The far bank rose before him, a steep, snow-covered incline that marked the boundary between the Soviet Union and Estonia, between the empire and its occupied territory. Not quite freedom, but closer than Marcus had been in 2 months. His stockinged left foot was numb, beyond pain, probably frostbitten. He scrambled up the bank on hands and knees, clawing at frozen earth, pulling himself over the edge as searchlights finally found him. The beams turned the snow into blazing white, turned Marcus into a target, into a silhouette against the darkness. He rolled over the bank's crest and into the shadow of the trees beyond. Behind him, on the ice, his boot had slid to a stop against a jutting rock. The microfilm inside it, 2 years of intelligence, 2 years of sacrifice, sat 20 meters from the Estonian shore, unclaimed and unreachable. Marcus lay in the snow, gasping, his body finally giving in to the exhaustion and cold and desperate mathematics of survival. He'd made it across. He was alive. But the mission, the thing that had defined every moment of the past 2 years, lay abandoned on the ice, a symbol of everything he'd lost to save himself. Marcus lay in the snow on the Estonian side of the border, his chest heaving, his left foot a distant throb of agony that his mind had stopped processing. The searchlight swept the trees above him, casting skeletal shadows that danced and twisted like the ghosts of all the people he'd failed. Irina, Pavel, every asset in his network who would now face interrogation, imprisonment, or worse. And somewhere on the ice behind him, his boots sat like a monument to 2 years of calculated risk reduced to nothing. He forced himself to move. Staying still meant freezing to death, and after everything, after 47 minutes in Moscow, 2 months of running, the desperate gamble across the river, dying of exposure 20 meters into Estonia, would be an insult to the effort. Marcus crawled deeper into the tree line, using the pines as cover, putting distance between himself and the border. Behind him, he heard voices. Russian, sharp with frustration, the searchlight swept back and forth across the ice, illuminating the boot. He could picture Viktor Krylov standing on the Soviet shore, staring at that piece of leather, understanding exactly what it meant. Understanding that Marcus had chosen survival over mission, life over duty. Understanding, perhaps, that in the end they weren't so different. Both professionals who dedicated their lives to the game. Both men who knew the price of everything. Marcus found a hollow between two fallen logs and wedged himself into it. The shaking had started. His body's delayed reaction to the cold, the exertion, the adrenaline crash. He pulled his canvas coat tighter, knowing it wouldn't be enough. His left foot was beyond saving. He could feel the deadness spreading. Frostbite. At best, he'd lose toes. At worst, the whole foot. But he was alive. The safe house was a cottage 2 kilometers up the coast, occupied by an elderly woman who'd been moving Allied personnel since the Second World War. She took one look at Marcus's foot, at the haunted expression in his eyes, and said nothing. She simply prepared hot soup, gave him blankets, and sent word through channels that moved faster than official communications. Within 24 hours, a boat would arrive. Within 48, Marcus Reed would be debriefed in Helsinki. Within a week, he'd be back in Virginia, sitting across from men in suits who'd never spent a night running from searchlights, never felt ice crack beneath their feet. They'd want to know everything. What he'd learned, what he'd lost, whether the operation could be salvaged. Marcus sat by the cottage window that night, his bandaged foot elevated, watching snow falls over the Baltic Sea. Somewhere across that dark water, Viktor Krylov was probably filing his own reports. Target escaped, intelligence unrecovered, network dismantled. 2 years of American espionage ended not with triumph, but with a boot sliding across ice. Would Viktor see it as victory? A consolation prize, the intelligence denied, even if the agent escaped? Or would he, like Marcus, recognize it for what it truly was? A stalemate between professionals, a draw in a game that neither side could truly win. Marcus thought about the 47 minutes in Moscow. How clean it had been, how precise. He'd executed the emergency protocol perfectly, had done everything right. And yet, here he was, empty-handed, hollow, carrying nothing but his own survival. In the intelligence business, they taught you that survival was victory, that a live agent was worth more than dead intelligence, that you fought to gather information, but you fought harder to live another day. But they never taught you how to reconcile that arithmetic, how to weigh one life against the lives of assets left behind, how to measure the value of breath against the cost of betrayed trust. Irina had whispered warnings into a phone, hoping Marcus would protect her. He'd saved himself instead. Pavel had kept faith for decades, maintaining networks in hostile territory. His reward would be a cell in Lubyanka, if he was lucky. The microfilm, supply routes, treaty violations, evidence that could have shifted diplomatic calculus, would be analyzed in Moscow instead of Langley. Viktor would receive commendations, promotions. The system would congratulate itself on neutralizing an American spy. And Marcus would receive his own commendations, his own quiet celebrations. The spy who escaped the KGB's finest hunter. The operative who survived 2 years deep cover. Another legend, another toast. Another name whispered in training sessions as an example of tradecraft excellence. No one would mention the boot. The snow continued falling, soft and relentless, covering the world in white. In 48 hours, Marcus would begin telling the story of his escape. He'd recount the details, analyze the operation's failure points, help the agency learn from his mistakes. He'd do his duty, file his reports, eventually accept another assignment. Because that's what professionals did. They survived, they adapted, they continued the mission. But late at night, in moments when the careful professional mask slipped, Marcus Reed would remember a boot sliding across ice, would remember the weight of it leaving his hand, the terrible relief of being lighter, the mathematics of sacrifice that reduced 2 years of meaning to a choice made in seconds. He'd remember Viktor Krylov's voice over the loudspeaker. "You can't run forever, Reed." And he'd wonder if Viktor had meant something deeper than the physical chase. If the colonel had understood in that moment that Marcus would spend the rest of his life running from this night. From the choice, from the cost. You couldn't outrun the state, but you also couldn't outrun yourself. The boat would come tomorrow. It would carry Marcus Reed to safety, to debriefing, to whatever came next in a career built on secrets and shadows. He would survive. He would continue. But the ghost that disappeared into Soviet Russia on October 17th, 1983, the man who'd spent 2 years building something meaningful, something worth the risk, that ghost would remain behind, frozen on the Narva River, waiting for a reckoning that would never come. Marcus closed his eyes against the falling snow. He'd escaped. He was free, and he'd never felt more trapped in his life.